Hi there, I'm your host, John Ivison. I'm joined as usual by Marcella and Munro, who is a principal at Macmillan Vantage, and by Andrew Balfour, who's the managing partner at Rubicon Strategies. So, hello friends. As we wait for the cabinet reveal and the return of Parliament, Justin Trudeau has broken cover with some details about Canada's pandemic recovery, namely the proof of vaccination passport that we hope will be accepted around the world, and the next step for individual and personal benefits to succeed the Canada Recovery Benefit, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy, and so on, which run out this Sunday. So let's take these in turn. Marcella, this sort of much vaunted international passport, it turned out to be nothing much more than the QR codes, which most of us have already from the provinces, and it's got a little Government of Canada flag stuck somewhere. At the same time, the government is telling us not to travel anywhere. So is there less to this than meets the eye? It seems to me that if you want to travel, you could still use your provincial proof of vaccination, which most of us have.
Yeah, I mean, I do have friends that have traveled a bit in this last few months, to Europe and to the United States, fully vaccinated, and no one has had any real problem either, crossing the border or going to events where they say you have to be fully vaccinated. Because there is already proof, as you say. So, this, in my view, should have been a national program from the get-go. I think the fact that, these codes, the way it looks, the way it presents is uneven across the country is actually more of a challenge, I feel like, when you go to another province in some ways, in another state or another country.
Right. This doesn't seem, just to pick up on that, because it doesn't seem to resolve that problem. I mean, I know when we travelled during the election that I think it was the QR code from BC did not compute in Quebec, and this doesn't seem to do anything about that.
Yeah, no, and so I think that the bigger hassle, I'm thinking of maybe some sunny time vacation this winter, but honestly, the bigger hassle I'm worried about is when I go back to BC for Christmas to see the folks, if there'll be some glitch in that system. And so in that way, they really should have, they should have started this months ago. It didn't help, of course. The provincial governments haven't exactly been willing partners in this. Initially, we know there were several provinces that didn't even want to do a quote-unquote vaccine passport. So, the feds had a hard time, I think, stepping into the breach because it's healthcare. But I just think it's kind of a mess still, and I don't really think it resolves the problems that will exist.
Andrew, do you think there is an inconsistency that, an international travel passport is coming out at the same time as the government is saying don't travel?
Well, I mean, people are going to travel. We saw even last year, the number of people who still left the country when they were being asked not to was quite significant.
Mainly cabinet ministers at that time, right?
Alberta cabinet ministers.
Ministers.
But I think, and not to be like a defender of the federal government, but I think that it is very difficult when the provinces own the proof of vaccination and some provinces aren't willing to make a deal around it. How can the feds just, healthcare is provincial jurisdiction, and how can they just go and strong arm the provinces into having one system? This system that was announced today still doesn't have all the provinces on board yet. So,
I will say the one difference, though, is because the federal government had to be the ones to procure all these vaccinations, we know, you can see it on my Ontario record, right, that they can trace that vaccine from plant to Canada to my arm. And so in that way, the federal government knows where all those vaccines have gone. So I think in this case, it isn't maybe as messy as it might be on something else. But point taken, the provinces dragging their knuckles haven't.
Well, I do think that the feds did not want to be the ones that were out front getting the blame for the passport, the domestic passport in the first place. So that even though they were funding it, they were quite happy that the provinces didn't put them in the foreground. Moving along to the second shoe that dropped today, the new $7 billion package of measures that will be in place until May 7th next year. The government has not renewed the Canada Recovery Benefit for individuals, but it is extending the wage subsidy in a much more targeted form towards the tourism and hospitality industries and to what it calls hardest hit business recovery programme businesses, which were, if they can show that they suffered deep and enduring losses due to the pandemic, then they will be eligible for measured benefits. And the caregiver and sickness benefits that were in place right across the country. They will continue. So, Marcella, was it right to end the Canada Recovery Benefit, given that the labour shortages we're seeing across the country?
Yeah, I mean, I think given all things on balance, it was probably the right thing to do. I think they got to keep a close eye on it because we know that the recovery so far, while we have returned to pre-pandemic levels of employment, we're still seeing some of the challenges that the pandemic caused, for instance, with women in the workforce, right? So this recovery has been, you could say, just as unequal as the original problems that it caused in the labor market. But we also know that these programs were not, fine-tuned, well-designed scalpel-type programs, and so they've had an effect on the economy that needs to be dealt with. I just think they need to keep being flexible where individuals are concerned, and they do have to keep an eye on what happens. And we're all sort of praying, hunkering down for winter, and praying that there isn't some other wave coming that's going to prevent this.
Andrew, what do you think on the political front? I mean, the NDP want the Canada Recovery Benefit to continue. The fact that it's not going to, does that cause any headaches for Justin Trudeau in the future?
No, it doesn't, because as we've discussed many times, the NDP have no money. So they can't trigger an election. They can't do anything. But I think, too, that there's a lot of people who point to, like, the CERB and now the CRB as being reasons that there's shortage of employment. Like, as an example, like my local pub, they have to close Monday and Tuesday because they don't have people there. It's probably better for my liver. But the reality is that we're not looking at a bigger thing, which is immigration. We've kind of not been doing a lot of immigration over the course of COVID, and that might be something that needs to be addressed quickly more than these things. So, I think that a lot of people are pointing their finger in the wrong direction right now.
Well, that's a good point on immigration. I mean, I have to say I'm pleased that there's finally a tighter correlation between the pandemic losses and the benefits paid, because I think, in the early months of the pandemic, not only was this thing profligate and scattergun, the wage subsidy, but they actually eased the restrictions on it, whereby you didn't even have to prove that any revenue losses were related to the pandemic. And so we saw massive abuses. I mean, this is hit close to home for you, Andrew, but one of the cases that sticks in my mind was the Royal Ottawa Golf Club, which got $1 million in wage subsidy and then recorded a $750,000 operating surplus. The Financial Post revealed 68 companies that were still paying dividends while receiving the cues. I mean, that is just rampant abuse. And, the program in the end cost $111 billion. I can't even say it. Certainly can't get my mind around how much that is. Without anybody really being obliged to show that the pandemic had an impact on their business.
I think you're quite right. Your column this week nailed it, right? It's very problematic, especially for those businesses that actually didn't really suffer during the pandemic. Maybe even their businesses went up and some of them were collecting the wage subsidy. So look, if I was the government, I get they want to get rid of this benefit for individuals. But like I said, they've still got to keep their eye on the ball in terms of like who individually was being impacted. Presumably trying to get childcare at the door quickly is a really good idea, and start to look more closely at the businesses that maybe got away with pocketing some of this money, and maybe thinking about ways to claw it back. Because it really should be individual Canadians and those truly at risk and smaller businesses that should be the priority. It shouldn't have just been a one for all. I also think, though, that the rest of the Western world did much of the same thing, right? So Canada, again, is not alone among nations for just doing everything they could, pulling every lever as fast as they could. So, I think we need to look at this comparatively as well.
Sure. Well, Chrystia Freeland suggested this was the final pivot, so let's hope it is.
I think that a thing that people are missing, and it's easy to point fingers on all of this kind of stuff, but the pace at which they had to develop these programs, there were bound to be errors. There's no way. They needed to protect Canadians. They needed to protect Canadian jobs, Canadian businesses. Like, if you're designing a program in 2 days, you're going to screw it up. Like, there's no doubt about it.
In the initial days, it was a tough sell for sure. You had to a tough slog. They had to get programs up and running. But when they refined them to make them easier to claim, that was when I think that the problems really set in.
Totally
anyway, let's move on. The Board of Internal Economy has ruled that MPs must be vaccinated. Is that the right call? Should the board be the body that makes it? Andrew, are MPs' rights being infringed?
Well, I mean, let's look at it this way. So there's an option that the Board of Internal Economy could have made this decision. But if this was put as a motion on the House, on the floor of the House, the same outcome would have happened. No matter how, like, the mechanics of it, like, if the same outcome is going to happen. The majority of the House is going to say, we want everyone to be vaccinated. There's differing counts on numbers of Conservatives who refuse to get vaccinated. You said this week that you thought it was 2 or 3. I've heard as high as, 10, 11, 12. Whatever it is, the Bloc, the Green Party, the NDP, and the Liberals are all going to vote for a parliamentary vax passport. That is, like, people can complain that, oh, maybe this, like, single-digit person board shouldn't do this. Like,
I do say
it's
that.
Going to happen one day. I know, but sure, but it's going to the same outcome. Like, no matter how it happens, this is what's going to happen. And if I'm Aaron O'Toole, I don't know why I don't just say to caucus, like, you're just causing me problems. Like, what possibly could make it so that you're, like, give me a good reason why you're not going to get vaccinated. You pointed this out when we were talking earlier this week, like, and we've talked about this before. The people who are going to have to get on an airplane to come here, well, they're going to have to be vaccinated. So then you mine it down to a small group of people who drive here, and given that the Conservatives don't have a seat in the 613 other than Pierre Poliver, who has already said that he's vaccinated, so then you're just getting into, like, he doesn't have any seats in Toronto. So, like, now you're just talking about the people in Southwest Ontario. So you can look at an electoral map and figure out who these people are. I mean, I have not bothered to do it, but you could figure it out pretty fast. So, as the leader of a party, if you have any power, you're just saying, please stop causing me this problem. Like, just go get a needle. Because at the same time, they're saying they don't want a hybrid model of parliament. So you can't have both.
Right. I think you're right. You're right. I mean, I don't agree with the board making that decision, which is a infringement on the Constitution. But Trudeau has public opinion on his side. He said today it's not too much to ask, and I think most people agree with that. If O'Toole decides he's going to continue with this, he's on a hiding to nothing. I think he's got to shut it down, even if it means taking a hard line with some of his caucus. Marcella?
Yeah, I think it's ridiculous. First of all, the fact that all the talk shows in the last couple of days, you just keep hearing the repetition of the words, whether you're for or against this motion about, let's talk about what parliamentary privilege means. To most Canadians, they don't know what parliamentary privilege means, and frankly, they don't care. It just sounds like another way in which their politicians are more worried about their own privilege. So that's a problem for O'Toole. The second problem for O'Toole is we just had an election where major issues were not discussed, from infrastructure to climate change to all kinds of issues that we're going to face with our economy, productivity. But the one thing you can say that Canadians were loud and clear on is that we're in favor of vaccinations. We're fine with vaccine passports. And so they're basically the Conservative Party's decided to draw a line in the sand on the one issue where we have a very clear signal from Canadians about what their expectation is moving forward. So on that level as well, it's preposterous that they're still allowing this debate to go on.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. Thanks a lot. We'll speak to you again next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.